Annia Aurelia Galeria Lucilla, more popularly known simply as Lucilla, is a figure whose story has been a topic of much interest amongst historians and academic circles for centuries now. And as the eldest daughter of the formidable Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, Lucilla lived a life steeped in privilege, power, and politics from a young age. And at 16 years of age, her influence would grow exponentially as she would marry the co-emperor of Rome, Lucius Verus, and become the empress of the Roman Empire. And while her early years reflected the grandeur of imperial Rome, her later life and death would be defined by political intrigue, familial betrayal, and a tragic downfall. Once regarded as a prominent figure in the imperial court, Lucilla would ultimately meet her end in an exile marked by humiliation, doubt, and despair. But what led to her tragic demise? How did a woman born to the most powerful family in the empire find herself condemned to death? By examining the ancient sources that chronicle her last days, we will uncover the dramatic events that sealed the fate of Lucilla and cemented her legacy as one of Rome's most tragic and controversial figures. But before we begin, don't forget, if you want to learn more about the deaths of some of history's greatest figures, then subscribe to my channel, Historical Exit. As was previously mentioned, Lucilla was the daughter of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the last of what is remembered as the 5 good emperors, and the wife of Lucius Verus as well, who was co-emperor of Rome alongside her father. But thanks to the movie Gladiator, she is most well remembered to history today as the sister of Emperor Commodus. And it would be the descent between these two siblings that would lead to her eventual death at the young age of 33. Lucilla had been the empress of the Roman Empire since she was 16, as she took control of the majority of the administration and day-to-day tasks of running an empire while her husband and father would be away on campaigns. However, after her husband Lucius Verus passed away, followed a few years later by the passing of her father, Lucilla would go from being empress and one of the most influential and important individuals in the empire to a royal with limited political sway and influence when her brother Commodus took the throne. And I'm sure, as many of you are already aware, Commodus is remembered as one of the worst emperors of the Roman Empire, and he was slowly leading the nation to its decline with his excesses and depravity. So it should come as no surprise that Lucilla, who has struggled and sacrificed greatly to ensure the prosperity of the Roman Empire during her time as empress, could not bear the thought of her manic brother destroying the foundations of everything she worked so hard to develop and grow. Therefore, Lucilla would conspire with a number of other powerful Romans, including her nephew Quintanius, the Praetorian prefect Publius Patrinus, her daughter Plautia, and former consul Marcus Annianus, to devise a plan to assassinate the emperor, her little brother Commodus. Cassius Dio highlights in book 73 of his works, The Roman History, how Lucilla planned to have her brother killed and why this assassination plot ended up failing. Lucilla, who was not pleased at having her brother reign instead of herself, formed a plot against him, and after organizing a conspiracy, she sent assassins to murder him. One of these, Quintanius, approached him with a dagger as he was entering the theater and said, "Here is the dagger the Senate sends you." But instead of striking him at once, he delayed a moment, and so was seized and slain. Cassius Dio, a contemporary of the events he is depicting, paints a vivid picture on how Lucilla devised a very effective assassination plot, considering how close the conspirator got to the emperor. But the plan ultimately ended up in failure due to Quintanius announcing his blow rather than striking at the emperor when he had a chance, allowing enough time for the Praetorian Guard accompanying Commodus to capture, torture for information, and eventually kill Quintanius. Eventually, all the conspirators in the plot would be imprisoned, and Lucilla's involvement and orchestration of the assassination plot would come to the forefront, with Cassius Dio stating that after the conspirators had been arrested, Commodus learned that Lucilla had been the instigator of the plot. Torture of those involved revealed her part in the scheme. Commodus did not at once put her to death, but instead exiled her to the island of Capri, allowing her to live for a time before ultimately ordering her execution. From the above quote by Cassius Dio, it would seem that Commodus showed some restraint and perhaps he did not harbor as much enmity towards Lucilla as she did towards him. And Commodus would allow his sister and her daughter to live in exile on the island of Capri. But Commodus was a suspicious and paranoid individual by nature, and it appears that he was unable to move past the political machinations of Lucilla and her involvement in his failed assassination attempt. And later on, he would send a centurion to the island of Capri shortly after her exile, where Lucilla alongside her daughter would be executed. Unfortunately though, Cassius Dio nor any other contemporary Roman historian comments on the exact method of execution for Lucilla, but it is plausible that she was executed by beheading, which was the most common form of capital punishment for royal family members. So it is evident from the contemporary historical sources we have available to ascertain that Lucilla was indeed sent into exile, where she would be later executed in some unverifiable manner on the orders of her brother, Emperor Commodus. Lucilla was one of the most powerful, influential, and politically astute individuals of her time, and one of the most important women in Roman history. But her bid to further her own political ambitions and to save the Roman populace from the depravity of her brother, she would end up leading an assassination plot that would ultimately result in her own death at the end. Publius Septimus Geta, better remembered to history simply as Geta, was co-emperor of Rome from 209 AD to 211 AD, firstly alongside his father Septimus Severus, followed by a brief period of shared rule with his brother Caracalla. Although Geta's rule as emperor would be brief and poorly documented, his death would, however, be one of the few aspects of his life that is well attested to and adequately recorded by contemporary ancient Roman historians. So in this video we will be doing a deep dive into understanding how Geta died and what exactly were the events that led up to him being killed at the young age of 22. But before we begin, don't forget, if you want to learn more about the deaths of some of history's greatest figures, then subscribe to my channel Historical Exit. Geta was born as the second son of Roman Emperor Septimus Severus, who was the last emperor standing during the turbulent year of the 5 emperors. And while he was alive, Geta and his brother Caracalla would have an uneasy but mostly civil relationship, portraying a false image of a united royal family to the Roman public. However, things would quickly deteriorate between the two brothers shortly after the death of their father, Emperor Severus, in February 211 AD, leaving both his sons, Geta and Caracalla, to rule Rome as co-emperors. And if history has taught us anything, it's that brothers love nothing more than sharing power with each other, and that the ties of blood and brotherly love can overcome any outside or external forces that attempt to threaten their bond. And so would be the case for Geta and Caracalla. Well, I am guessing that's what Emperor Severus was probably thinking while he was lying on his deathbed. But he had severely miscalculated the animosity the two brothers held for each other, with Caracalla having an especially strong hatred of his upstart little brother, who he felt did not deserve to be emperor. These two brothers hated each other to such a huge degree that they even considered splitting the empire in half, so they could minimize their interactions with each other. However, unfortunately, their mother Julia Domina was still alive, and she was determined to put an end to any discussions of empire splitting and was adamant on forcing the two brothers to reconcile. And to further this goal, Julia would allow Caracalla to hold peace negotiations with Geta at her villa. And during this meeting, Geta, the young co-emperor of Rome, would meet his end. And our sole contemporary Roman source for the death of Geta is Cassius Dio in his work Roman History, which purports the following. Antonius then approached his mother, as if he were going to have a peaceful conference with his brother, and induced her to send for him. Geta, suspecting nothing, entered the room just as he was, and he was immediately struck down in his mother's arms. He expired in her lap, streaming with blood and clasping her hand, while she cried out and shrieked with horror, witnessing such a spectacle. Cassius Dio states clearly in the above statement that Geta was brutally murdered in the arms of his mother, by either his own brother or perhaps by the Praetorian guards under the command of his brother. There is much ambiguity in the sources about who struck the killing blow, and this remains a point of contention, but nonetheless it was clear Caracalla had committed fratricide and had his brother assassinated to curb his rise to power and to solidify his place as the sole emperor of the Roman Empire. This discourse is also further corroborated by a contemporary Roman historian, Herodian, who describes a nearly identical depiction of the assassination of Geta in his work History of the Empire, stating that Geta, suspecting nothing, came without his guards, his whole attention fixed on his brother and on their mother, who was anxiously watching both her sons. But as he entered, Caracalla moved quickly toward him as if to embrace him, but before he could speak, the centurions rushed at Geta, sword in hand, and surrounded him. Geta fled in terror and threw himself into his mother's arms. In his fright, he clung to her neck and cried out for help, wailing and reproaching her for permitting him to be murdered by his brother's hands in her own embrace. In addition to the above two contemporary Roman sources, the later ancient Roman historical text, the Historia Augusta, purports a nearly identical depiction of Geta's death, highlighting that even over a century after his death, no other discourse other than assassination by Caracalla in his mother's villa was present in Roman society and thought in regards to the death of Geta. Lucius Septimus Bassianus, better remembered to history as Caracalla, is one of Rome's most infamous emperors, and his reign was filled with much bloodshed, turmoil, and contention. Caracalla ruled as co-emperor from 198 AD to 211 AD, after which he would rule as the sole emperor till his death in 217 AD. And the circumstances behind the death of this Roman emperor is one of the most bizarre and unexpected deaths in history, as Caracalla would be killed while he was urinating in the middle of a campaign. But who killed Caracalla? Why was he assassinated? And how did he die? These are the questions we will be answering in this video, and by analyzing contemporary ancient Roman sources, we will be able to better understand how exactly did Caracalla die. But before we begin, don't forget, if you want to learn more about the deaths of some of history's greatest figures, then subscribe to my channel Historical Exit. Caracalla from a young age was always quick to temper and even quicker to use violence and brutality to remove any potential threats or obstacles that stood in the way of his ambitions, and by the age of 16 he had already had his father-in-law executed and his first wife banished and then murdered. Later on in his life, he would eventually go on to kill his own brother Geta in the arms of their mother in 211 AD, and from then on he would rule as the sole emperor of Rome. And with his political power consolidated, Caracalla was keen to fulfill his military ambitions next, and he would embark on campaigns against the Germanic tribes and the Parthians. Caracalla's reputation as a fierce warrior and general would steadily grow, and he would be regularly seen amongst the soldier camps, participating and sharing in their hardships. And it was during one such campaign against Parthia in 217 AD that Caracalla would meet his end. Cassius Dio, a contemporary of Caracalla, records in his historical text Roman History the following in regards to the death of this infamous Roman emperor. Caracalla had dismounted from his horse in order to relieve himself, and while he was doing this, Martialis, who had been posted by Macrinus to strike him down, killed him. In this passage by Cassius Dio, it is evident that the assassination of Caracalla was well planned, and there were at least two conspirators, Martialis and Macrinus, involved in this assassination of the emperor. But why did these two soldiers bear such a grievance against Caracalla? And what were they hoping to achieve by assassinating him? Cassius Dio provides the following reason as to why Martialis, a Roman legionary, agreed to participate in this assassination plot. Martialis had a grievance against Caracalla because he had been refused to the post of centurion. It is clearly highlighted in the above statement that Martialis had been overlooked for promotion to the rank of centurion, meaning he had lost the opportunity to not only progress in his military career, but also a chance to increase his wealth and prestige as well. And like many overworked and burnt out employees who had given their all just to be ignored by management once again, Martialis would be enraged at the perceived slight by Caracalla and he wanted to take some form of retribution against him. And it would seem that Martialis' discontent was evident to those around him, as Macrinus, a prefect of the Praetorian Guard, would recruit Martialis to be the primary instigator and participant in the assassination of Caracalla. Cassius Dio states the following as to why a prefect of the Praetorian Guard would want to kill the Roman emperor who had entrusted him with such a high and respected position. Macrinus began to be afraid for his life, as Caracalla had grown suspicious of him and was inclined to put him to death. Caracalla had received some slanderous reports about Macrinus and was thus provoked against him, so that Macrinus, learning of these suspicions, resolved to strike first and rid himself of Caracalla. When one takes into consideration the deadly ruthlessness that Caracalla displayed to any individual who he considered as a political rival or threat to his power, it is not difficult to understand why Macrinus felt that his only solution to this problem was to kill Caracalla before the emperor could strike him down first. There's also a secondary discourse mentioned in the Roman history which states that Caracalla had heard of a prophecy from an oracle foretelling that Macrinus would become emperor, which greatly angered Caracalla and made him start beginning to plan the execution of Macrinus. So here we are presented with at least two reasons, a troubling prophecy and slanderous reports against Macrinus having reached the ear of Caracalla, and therefore it seems probable to conclude that Macrinus took advantage of Martialis' anger at being overlooked for promotion and recruited him to assassinate the emperor when he was urinating and unable to defend himself. There are no other discourses present in contemporary sources or even in modern academia about Caracalla being assassinated by Macrinus and Martialis, and the fact that Macrinus would become emperor shortly after the death of Caracalla only strengthens the proposition that Macrinus was the mastermind behind the assassination of his predecessor. Marcus Opilius Macrinus is a name that few outside of Roman history circles will be familiar with, but as Gladiator 2 continues to grow in popularity and mainstream attention, the name Macrinus is more popular now than it perhaps has ever been before. However, many may not be aware that this character portrayed in the movie Gladiator 2 by Denzel Washington is actually based off of a real historical figure known as Marcus Opilius Macrinus, but more commonly referred to as Emperor Macrinus. And although the rule of this emperor is often overshadowed by the more infamous emperors of Rome, Macrinus still holds a unique place in history as the first member of the equestrian class to ascend to the imperial throne. His brief reign from 217 to 218 AD was fraught with political instability, military dissatisfaction, and fierce opposition from loyalists of the Severan dynasty. And just like his dramatic rise to power, Macrinus' end would also be bloody, brutal, and short-lived, as he would find himself surrounded by enemies on all sides. But what led to the demise of this unlikely emperor? Who orchestrated his fall, and how was he ultimately killed? These are the questions we will unravel by delving into ancient Roman sources that shed light on Macrinus' final days. But before we begin, don't forget, if you want to find out more about the deaths of some of history's greatest figures, then subscribe to my channel, Historical Exit. Before we can start discussing how exactly Emperor Macrinus died, it is first necessary to have a very basic understanding of how he got to the elevated position of emperor in the first place, and just how intertwined Macrinus' rise to power was with his ultimate downfall and the end of his lineage. Macrinus was born into a wealthy equestrian family in the province of Caesarea, and his family would utilize their resources to get Macrinus trained as a lawyer, and he would eventually become so renowned and well respected in the legal field, he would end up working directly for Emperor Severus. After the passing of Emperor Severus, he would also gain the respect of his son, the infamous Emperor Caracalla, and he would eventually promote Macrinus to the rank of prefect of the Praetorian Guard, one of the highest and most prestigious positions in the empire. However, he would soon find himself falling out of Caracalla's good graces, as some slanderous reports about Macrinus would reach his ear, as well as a rumor of a prophecy that Macrinus would become emperor after the death of Caracalla. Knowing there's only a very limited time frame for him to act, Macrinus, along with another Roman legionary named Martellius, would formulate a plan to assassinate the emperor. And one day, when Caracalla was going to answer nature's call, he was set upon by Martialis, who would stab the emperor to death. Martialis would then be struck down and killed by the Praetorian Guard, and Macrinus would take advantage of this chaos and convince the legions under the command of Caracalla to crown him as the new emperor of Rome. However, the remaining family members of the Severan dynasty weren't going to take this insult lightly, and Caracalla's aunt, Julia Maesa, the sister of his mother, would promote her grandson Elagabalus as the rightful emperor of the Roman Empire, going so far as to state that her grandson was actually the illegitimate son of Caracalla and the true heir to the Severan dynasty. And using a mixture of bribes, increased wages, and a reinstatement of military policies created by Caracalla, Julia Maesa was able to win over many legions to support the cause of her grandson, and he would be crowned emperor in 218 AD. Civil war would soon follow though, and the forces of Macrinus and Elagabalus would clash in the Battle of Antioch, and the legions of Macrinus would be soundly defeated, forcing Macrinus to flee from the battlefield and attempt to escape to Cilicia. However, Macrinus would soon be recognized and captured near Rome in the city of Chalcedon, and he would be sent in chains back to Elagabalus. And it was here in the year 218 AD that Macrinus would meet his end, and Roman historian Cassius Dio vividly describes his execution as follows. Macrinus, disguised as a courier, fled, but he was recognized and captured near Chalcedon. He was brought back to Cappadocia, where he was executed. Cassius Dio, a contemporary of Macrinus, provides a simple outline of the events leading up to his death, including his capture at Chalcedon, where he was attempting to evade detection by pretending to be a courier, and lastly that he was executed at Cappadocia, but the manner of his execution is never expanded upon. Roman historian Herodian also provides a similar discourse in regards to the death of Macrinus, which further strengthens the validity of the claims made by Cassius Dio. Herodian states that Macrinus, realizing that his defeat was complete and that his troops had gone over to Elagabalus, fled from Antioch, discarding the imperial insignia and attempting to disguise himself as an ordinary citizen. But he was captured on the road to Cilicia and once identified was brought back in chains. He was executed shortly thereafter by order of the new emperor. So again, another contemporary source provides a nearly identical depiction of the events leading up to the death of Macrinus and his subsequent execution that would follow. Additionally, there are no other discourses present in ancient Roman sources or even in modern academia in regards to the death of Macrinus. Therefore, we can conclude with a high degree of certainty that Macrinus was executed in the city of Cappadocia on the orders of the new emperor Elagabalus, a relative of Caracalla, the emperor he had assassinated to gain ultimate power in the first place. So I really hope you found that video to be interesting and educational. And if you did enjoy it, please do like and share this video with others. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to my channel Historical Exit to find out more about the deaths of some of history's greatest figures. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day. Bye.